SB 165, and I recognize the consumer advocate, Don Kreis.
Good morning, Senators. I have a handout. Oh, now it's on. Good morning, Senators. As you know, I'm Donald Kreis, the consumer advocate, and I'd like to begin by thanking Senator Perkins Quokka for introducing this bill at my request, and I would like to thank Senator Avard for agreeing to recess this hearing for a week so that I could be here. More than 4 years ago, in December of 2018, I asked Senator Fuller Clark to introduce a bill whose purpose was to require the Public Utilities Commission to build and operate a statewide utility customer data platform. The reasons I made that request are as sound today as they were back then. Everything consumers need to do in order to become more autonomous, empowered, educated, and money-saving users of electricity and natural gas depends on access to granular data about their energy usage. And even more important than access is the ability to share that data with unregulated third-party providers of energy services, whether it's an energy efficiency contractor, a solar developer, an energy manager, or a municipal community power aggregation program. And a statewide data platform means these service providers can get the data they need efficiently and conveniently. That's the difference between success and failure. But a funny thing happened on the way to the hearing room. The Office of Legislative Services requested a fiscal impact statement from the PUC, and lickety-split, I was summoned to a meeting with the executive director of the PUC, the general counsel of the PUC, and the Commissioner of Information Technology. And the three of them made clear that they would make sure my bill died a prompt and unceremonious death unless I figured out a way to get the data platform built by some entity other than the PUC. Here's what really happened. Commissioner Goulet of the Department of Information Technology reminded me that the data platform is an IT project. And regardless of whether the bill assigned the job to the PUC, his department would have to be involved, he said. Then he pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Don, you're a customer of the DOIT, right? Do you really want us doing something like this?" Well, I decided he had a point, so I redrafted the bill so as to task the state's electric and natural gas utilities with developing the data platform. But I was worried that the utilities would perceive the data platform as a threat to their dominant role. So I was concerned that the utilities would drag their feet or indeed just never get the project done. So I inserted language in the bill requiring the PUC to open an adjudicative proceeding to determine the parameters of the data platform, what it would be like, and how it would be governed. And at the utilities' insistence, we included language promising them cost recovery, which in turn led to a provision allowing the PUC to halt the project if the costs became unreasonable. In due course, that bill became law, Chapter 286 of the 2019 New Hampshire laws. It happens to be one of the two energy-related bills that Governor Sununu did not veto that session. And as directed, the PUC opened its adjudicative proceeding in December of 2019. Well, it took over a year until April 21st, 2021, but danged if all of the parties to the docket, including my office, a variety of other stakeholders, and all of the utilities, all 5 of them, reached a settlement agreement on how the data platform should move forward. The utilities, to my absolute delight, proved me wrong. I thought they were in it to kill it. I really did. That they would use the docket to make sure that the data platform just wouldn't happen. But they demonstrated the opposite, that they saw the value of the project and were and are committed to its successful development. So what happened then? Well, nothing for 10 long months. Then on March 2nd, 2022, the Commission, the PUC, issued Order Number 26589, approving our settlement agreement, including our plan to set up a governance council to assure that the stakeholders would participate alongside the utilities in building and running the platform. But there was a catch, and you see it there in the excerpts from the order I have distributed to you, pages 15, 16, and 17 of that order. The PUC decided that its role is not just to regulate the data platform, making sure once it's fully planned that costs won't be excessive, and always assuring that this, along with everything else the utilities do with ratepayer money, is prudent. The PUC also ruled that it would actually supervise and oversee the project itself, much like how a board of directors oversees a business or a nonprofit. So, and if you read through that excerpt I gave you, you'll see what I mean. The PUC talks about, we want you to develop a more detailed description of the data and functions needed for platform operation. The customer interface should be illustrated in a way that describes the customer or third-party experience with the API. API is Application Programming Interface. An actual demonstration of the user experience with Data Platform API would be most helpful. The PUC directed the utilities to conduct customer surveys and also survey existing software and software under development in other jurisdictions. Now, there's nothing wrong with that as a matter of the prudent and thoughtful development of a project like this. What's wrong with that is that that is not the kind of stuff that a regulator should be doing. That is what the utilities do when they build a project like this that requires know-how and some capital investment. This insistence on active and pervasive PUC oversight of the project has slowed progress and diverted attention and energy away from figuring out how to best create the platform into making sure the PUC has the operational information it decided the agency needs. It is my respectful suggestion that in defining its role that way, the PUC has misinterpreted the statute you adopted 4 years ago. The intent of that statute was to authorize and encourage a garden variety, albeit very important, utility capital project. In legal terms, the data platform project differs from, say, the construction of a new substation by requiring the utilities to work jointly with each other. That's somewhat unusual, but not unprecedented, and also with a governance council where they must reach consensus with stakeholders. That is novel. The intent and purpose of Senate Bill 165, therefore, is to clarify the intent of the 2019 legislation and make sure the PUC knows it is not responsible for overseeing the development of the data platform. The PUC is a regulator. Its role is generally limited to after-the-fact prudence determinations, and in this case, it has a safety valve of sorts to protect ratepayers from the cost of the project if the price tag is excessive. This bill would make that limited, though very important, role clear, and it clarifies the process that would apply in the event that it becomes necessary or appropriate for the PUC to determine that the cost might be excessive. As you all know, energy prices have gone haywire since the bill I drafted for Senator Fuller Clark became law 4 years ago. We need the statewide utility data platform now more than ever as an important tool for opening new technologies and new services to customers who are yearning for ways to save money and enjoy new choices. Senate Bill 165 would remove an unnecessary roadblock to that process, which is why I respectfully request you report it to the floor as ought to pass. One final thought. I believe Mr. Licata is going to come before you and suggest an amendment to the bill. I've seen his amendment and I am fine with it and suggest that you also adopt that. That's all I have to say. I would, of course, be delighted to answer any questions that Chairman Avard might be willing to entertain.
Thank you for your testimony and for your support. Questions from the committee? Everybody all fully on board? All right, thank you very much.
Wow, I hope I haven't cowed you all into silence.
Not at all. And with that, we'll actually ask Mr. Licata to come up and discuss his amendment proposal.
Thank you. Good morning. Michael Licata representing Eversource Energy. Appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. Eversource doesn't take a position on the primary purpose of the bill, which is to clarify the jurisdictional issues among the state agencies that the consumer advocate just spoke to you about. We do have a concern with the bill as drafted, though, related to the flow of approvals in the bill. So as introduced, the bill would require the utilities to develop an implementation plan for the data platform along with budgets to support that. And then the utilities are supposed to submit that plan to the Consumer Advocate, Department of Energy, and Public Utilities Commission. At that point, under the bill, either the DOE or the OCA can raise a concern on the basis of cost and refer the plan for review to the Public Utilities Commission. Absent that, the commission does not get involved in that review at that point in time, and presumably the utilities would move forward on the implementation and start spending money. On line 17 of the bill, though, the commission is authorized to review any costs incurred by the utilities under this section. And our concern is after we submit our plan to the DOE and OCA, if they don't raise an objection and we start implementing and spending money, what if after the fact the commission disagrees with them and says, no, that plan was too expensive, it doesn't meet our cost benefit test. And then the utilities, for just sort of doing what the act is requiring of them, are at risk of disallowance for funds that we have spent to implement that plan. So obviously that's a concern for us. And as the consumer advocate said, we do have language to help clarify that if the consumer advocate or the Department of Energy do not refer to the PUC, that the utilities are entitled for cost recovery pursuant to the plan that everyone had a chance to review under the first section of this bill. I did share that with a few folks, including the bill sponsor, just the other day, and the Department of Energy and the consumer advocate. So happy to share that language with the committee.
Do you have it with you now?
I do.
Could we see it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And give Nick a copy if that's okay.
Yeah, I have several that I can hand out. But happy to answer any
Yeah,
questions.
Questions from the committee? Senator Alston?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Licata, for taking my question. Could you walk me back and explain, and just, I think I missed the beginning of your explanation as to cost recovery. And so why would you start spending costs before final approval? What am I missing there?
Sure. So the bill as currently structured would require the utilities to develop a plan for implementation of the data platform, which would include capital and expenses. That would go to three entities: the Consumer Advocate, Department of Energy, and the Public Utilities Commission. If two of those entities, so not the commission, but two of those entities, the Consumer Advocate or Department of Energy, raise a concern and defer the implementation and request the commission to do a cost-benefit review, the commission would then review the costs. If not, the utilities would presumably move forward on the implementation of the plan per the requirement under this is section 4 of the bill. Our concern is that if we start that implementation because the Department of Energy or Consumer Advocate has not raised an objection, after the fact, the commission under section 5 of the bill, line 17, could say, we actually disagree with those other two state agencies. They should have raised a concern on cost, and therefore utility, you're at risk of not getting cost recovery for what we believe would be prudently incurred spending.
Follow up?
Okay, thank you for laying that out. I think the piece that I'm missing, back it up, is why would you start implementing before you knew all three were in agreement?
So under the bill, only two of the three have the authority to review the costs under section 4. So either, I guess, two changes could be suggested. One is, which you see in the amendment, to allow the utilities cost recovery pursuant to the plan, or another change could be that the commission could also, when we submit the plan, initiate an adjudicative proceeding to review those costs. I'll defer to the consumer advocate and Department of Energy as to which approach makes more sense. But our proposal, sort of in keeping with the spirit of the bill, to not, I think the idea is to not slow things down, would be to allow for cost recovery.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sam? Did you get a copy of this amendment too, by any chance?
I have not seen it. I'd be happy to look and give my thoughts. For the record, Sam Evans Brown, Executive Director of Clean Energy New Hampshire. We have a seat on the Data Governance Council that is the subject of this bill. I would share that I don't even go to those meetings because I don't know enough to understand what's going on at the meetings of the Data Governance Council. We hire an expert witness to go for us, someone who understands software interoperability and utility data systems at a level that's required to attend these meetings and participate meaningfully. And so I think I only say that because I think it's important to understand why the level of involvement from the Public Utilities Commission has been somewhat inappropriate and has been slowing things down in a way that's not helpful. Most recently, there was a request for the PUC to weigh in on an RFP outline that the council had put together. They were asked to respond within 2 weeks because this is a, quote, critical path item. The rest of the process cannot proceed until they issue this RFP. And as of yet, that was issued on January 5th. They were hoping for a 2-week turnaround for feedback from the PUC, and we still have not heard from the PUC. So that's an important and substantial delay to the process that's been a direct result of the amount of micromanagement that's been going on. So I really do urge the committee to take this seriously and step in. And just a short anecdote. I'm a big energy nerd. I am the type of person who wants their utility data. Unitil, my utility, has the My Green Button program that you can go online, you can download a spreadsheet of all your consumption and generation information if you're a net metered customer like I am. I went online a couple of years ago and I clicked the button to get my data and I got a blank spreadsheet. And when I reached out to Unitil asking why, they said, "Oh yeah, because of our back-end systems, we actually can't generate any data for net metered customers." So I tell that anecdote just because it shows you the state of where things are at right now with regards to the access to consumer data, which is that it's pretty bad. Even the people who want it sometimes can't get it, and that has impacts, right? So if I wanted to invest in something that would shift my load from one place to another, I have no way to evaluate if that would be a good investment or not because I cannot get the data that would allow me to make that decision. I'm happy to look at the amendment, provide any feedback on it, but I really do think that this merits intervention from the legislature.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, our last speaker, Josh. Department of Energy taking a neutral stance.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs of the Department of Energy. Mr. Chairman, as you stated, the department is neutral on this bill. There are a few questions just to pose to the committee just for their consideration. On lines 5 or I should say at the end of line 5, where it's the very first sentence there says within 60 days of its receipt with filing, the department will request that to be changed to 90 days. Just given the timing of when one of these proposals may land, we could be in the middle of default service review or a rate review or things like that, just in terms of making sure that we can have the staff available to actually be able to review these in a timely manner and in such a manner that it's an in-depth analysis. We can at least, to the best of our ability, rather than if we have so many other things that are piling up, we're only able to give it a cursory review. So that extra 30 days just gives us a little more wiggle room in terms of being able to do an appropriate review. The next pieces, I had spoken to the consumer advocate in the audience about this. I think there's reasonable people could disagree. I think there's concern of what happens if there is a maybe a strict interpretation of the reading of it could say the utilities file a plan, and unless the OCA and the department agree with 100% of what's in that plan, then we would have to go to the adjudicative process. But if there were some mechanism that allowed for some negotiation, and again, I know the consumer advocate disagrees about this and thinks this is misinterpretation, I just want to make sure that we don't get to a point of where if there's some small sticking point, that then it goes into adjudicative process rather than something that could just be talked about between the parties, and then everyone comes to a situation where everybody is comfortable with what the product is.
What would you propose as a fix?
So here's the rub. I believe the consumer advocate doesn't think that a fix is necessarily needed. I'm just raising the concern because I realize that lawyers can disagree, and there could be an interpretation by some, whether it's at the utilities, whether it's the department, and reads that says, nope, that is jointly file a plan. The plan is the plan, and there's no negotiation as part of whatever that plan is.
Lawyers disagree?
Believe it or not, reasonable people can disagree. So I'm highlighting as a concern. I don't necessarily think that's a do or die kind of thing, given the other testimony here today, but just flagging it as a potential thing to consider. And again, I do realize that you get too micromanaging in legislation, then you run into other problems on the other end. Right. So.
Did you see the amendment by any chance?
Yes. So thank you for the question. Yes. So Mr. Licata sent the department the amendment. Our folks are still reviewing the specific language of the amendment, given losing Monday due to the holiday. However, I will say the department has no objection with the concept that Mr. Licata has raised, or the concern, or that the fact that it needs to be addressed.
Okay. Questions from the committee? Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for taking my question. I'm looking at line 5, and it seems that the squishy part that you're worried about is in between those two lines. And is it because the consumer advocate may request, and then down to 8, upon such a request, the commission shall? Is that where you're worried that people can't have conversation about modifications without having to go to adjudication?
So actually, what happened prior to that, I believe it would in the process. So the utilities, my understanding, the utilities would come together. They would all have to agree. So that's one first step where that's silent. So they would all have to negotiate among themselves. They then deliver a plan to both the OCA and the department, saying, "Here's what we'd like to do."
Right.
I'm concerned that if there is one sticking point somewhere in there, either it's the OCA has it or the department has it, and says, hey, we're fine with, I use 98%, say 98% of this plan, but here's this last piece that we have this sticking point on.
Yeah.
That if there's an opportunity to go back to the utilities and say, hey, if you take out this piece, we're fine with it and we don't have to go away. I don't know if the language allows for multiple filings of plans, or if there's an amended or a process to amend a plan. So it says shall file, so utility subject to this section shall jointly file with the department. So I don't know if that, I could see reasonable attorneys disagreeing as to whether or not that means, no, you have one shot, your application is your application, your filing is your filing, and then there's no negotiation on what it is. Now, there could be discussions. There's nothing precluding any discussions prior to that. They could also talk to us ahead of time and say, hey, we're thinking of this. What do you guys think? So I think that would probably be the out for it. But if there were some other thing that didn't get caught until later, but that probably an agreement, or I should say discussion between all the parties involved of, hey, let us see it before the deadline in case we have concerns, would probably address those issues.
Oh,
Yes, please. So, so the space to do that, the space to make sure that we don't have to get to the adjudication process, is actually line 3, prior to the undertaking.
Yes. So probably,
there's-
or in the current of, I should say, I guess in the process of undertaking the requirements of this action, we would just need to make sure that all the parties, and I think we could have discussions with all the parties to make sure. Please don't deliver it to us on whether it's, depending if the committee is so inclined, whether it's the 59th day or the 89th day, to not give us 24 hours to review this before we need to make a decision on it. and then you're submitting a final plan. But I think we can have those conversations, and I think that's, now that I'm thinking about this out loud, that's probably an elegant solution to all of this. That's not actually an issue.
I love that, an elegant solution.
There we go.
Yes.
Follow up?
No,
None?
that's,
Okay. Any further questions?
Man,
Senator Pearl?
so you think you've got the problem solved? I was gonna offer you a little bit of language, but if you think
No,
you've
I
got it
think
solved-
as long as all the parties, the utilities could send something to us, sort of a draft version of a plan for us to get an initial take on, and then that official plan is then filed. At that point, then the clock starts ticking for that 60 or hopefully 90 days for the department and the OCA review on that. I think that's probably the best. That's the best solution that includes the maximum amount of flexibility without also sort of being overly prescriptive in the statute.
Okay.
So now that I'm talking out loud, I think we're okay with
All
it.
right, I was just gonna offer that, or you could offer the utilities an opportunity to amend the plan, while it's in the filing process, something to that effect. But if you're okay, I'm gonna leave it alone.
Yeah, I was going
It
to say, I'm
doesn't-
assuming I can't see behind me, so I don't know if the utilities, the OCA, are starting to
no
throw
one's doing
things
anything,
at me
which is good, so.
about the concept, but
All right, we'll leave it alone.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you. And 79. All right. Senator Lang, you are recognized. 79.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. I'm Senator Tim Lang, representing Senate District 2, which is up in the Lakes region. As you may be aware, and I know Senator Avard's aware, a couple of years ago, we expanded net metering to include municipal host generators to allow towns to take advantage of renewable energy above 1 megawatt to be able to lower energy costs for the taxpayers, which will result hopefully in lower taxes. What you have before you is a bill that does a similar thing. It adds 16 words to the existing statute. It starts on line 6, where it says, or 100% of the customer's aggregate average energy consumption over the past 12 months. And then it jumps down to line 9, where it says, provided it. So again, the idea behind this bill, this is a pro-business bill. The idea behind the bill is that customers, businesses that are high energy users can put in an array bigger than 1 megawatt to help deal with their consumption and participate in the net metering program, provided that at the end of the year, their consumption, their generation nets to zero, basically, right? They produce as much energy as they consumed, is what the requirement is there, where it talks about the 100% of the customer's aggregate energy consumption over the last 12 months. So the idea being, again, that they can't build it beyond their consumption needs. They build it to their consumption needs, and it allows them to help lower their costs. One of the things I learned in the Senate here recently is that we have some multi-state manufacturers here in our state. And what I didn't know is that these multi-state manufacturers compete with other states in the same company to build products. So I'm going to use Anheuser-Busch as an example. So Anheuser-Busch has multiple plants so they can brew beer and bottle beer. Merrimack competes with New Jersey if on the cost of per can to build a beer, to make beer. If New Hampshire's is more expensive, when they factor everything in, they will shift that manufacturing to New Jersey if it's cheaper in New Jersey. So the goal of this bill is to allow our New Hampshire businesses to compete in this market where we have multi-state, especially multi-state manufacturers that are looking to produce the per widget cost down so that they can compete and keep more manufacturing here in New Hampshire. I'm sure there's a lot more people way more smarter than me about net metering that's behind me that if you want to ask more questions about. But that is the goal of the bill, is to make New Hampshire competitive in our business market.
Are you sure it's not just to make beer cheaper?
Well,
Questions from the committee?
so another company, by the way, Frudenberg is another example of that, where they have multi-state manufacturing. We have several manufacturers in the state that
They're at
produce.
exit 18, I believe, right?
I'm sorry?
Frudenberg's up at exit 18, I believe.
They have multiple manufacturing plants throughout the state and other states as well.
I know one. All right, seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. And with that, we're going to have Jim Monahan, DuPont Group.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jim Monahan with the DuPont Group. I'm here today on behalf of Revision Energy to speak to Senate Bill 79. You know, I think Senator Lang captured it very well. It's not especially complicated in the way the bill is written, but will have significant impact on the large energy users in the state. We're passing out a letter to you now signed by a number of those very large businesses that are constrained by the current state law. And so we're trying to make an adjustment here to make them more competitive and give them more control over their energy costs. Senate Bill 79 makes a change on the limits to net metering for individual customers by raising the cap from 1 megawatt to 5. This is just for an individual customer, not group net metering. I'm not here today asking to expand group net metering. This is just to an individual customer that might be more than 1 megawatt. The folks that have signed on to this letter have, and actually there's probably more to come as we move into the House session as well, have a problem where their consumption is more than a megawatt. But one of the problems in the current net metering law is if you are Hitchner, for example, and you produce more than a megawatt, you get paid nothing for what you export into the market. And so as a practical reality, you don't build a facility larger than a megawatt. This is attempting to try to resolve that glitch in state law.
Jim, real quick,
Yes.
when it goes back into the market, if this goes through, that excess energy that goes into the market, does it go in wholesale or retail?
So this bill doesn't address that. The compensation for that is part of the process that's underway at the Public Utilities Commission to develop the permanent rate for the net metering credit. I think we've learned our experiences of trying to set the rate in state law, and so this defers that question to the Public Utilities Commission. This only deals with the size of the project that can be included.
And I'll let you get going in
Yeah,
a
sure.
second. But also, if they want to generate like a 1.5 megawatts or 3 megawatts or something to that effect, it's specifically for the purpose of using it, and whatever they don't use goes into the market. Is that how I'm understanding this? Or am I misunderstanding this?
No, you're capturing it. I mean, there's it's a combination of physics and accounting. And so the goal here is, as Senator Lang has suggested, that you would build it to the consumption levels. But there are nights and weekends where a manufacturer might not be working and they export. And that's the netting that's part of the net metering process. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I'll let you continue. Yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay. Much of what I was going to say just got captured in the questions you asked, Senator, but
I'm good.
yep. As a practical matter, as I said, this bill applies to not a lot of customers, but they are customers that employ a lot of people. As I said, and Senator Lang captured very well about the internal competition among the folks that have signed on to this letter and others. Not only are they competing for the production in New Hampshire versus New Jersey, but we're also finding global companies that ask their local manufacturers to comply with climate change standards and clean energy and things like that. And so there's pressure on these global companies or national companies in New Hampshire to meet those standards, but they are constrained by the structure in current law, and we're trying to address that.
One question that I think probably we'll hear either here or somewhere in the House, is there any cost shifting?
I think the answer to that is no, but again, that is a question of getting the rate correct, and that's what's taking place at the Public Utilities Commission. But if you, I'm sure there are some.
It's going to be asked somewhere, so that's.
Yeah, no, it's been asked and answered several times, but the VEDA study, which you've probably heard about, I think answered that question.
Yeah.
So we don't have to necessarily get ourselves all tangled up in it. It's taken a long time, but I think there is an answer to that question with regard to and Senator Pearl's about to ask a question.
He is?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Only if the chair grants me the opportunity.
Well, okay.
So I'm reading the whole bill, not just section 1, and reading section 2 as well. And I just want to make sure I've got my head around this. So we're adding new language that says that facilities up to 5 megawatt must consume 20% of their generation on an annual basis. Is that correct? So we would now allow someone to build a 4.9 megawatt facility if they use that much energy at some point, but the remainder of the time they're not using it, we're gonna allow them to net meter all the part they're not using when they're nights and weekends and times where they're not doing it. And they only have to then meet the test of 20% on an annual basis. Am I understanding it correctly? I know I threw a lot
No,
of
that's
different
a
pieces in
fair
together.
reading of it, and in a minute I'm going to talk about the kind of the history of this bill, the way it's moved through. That 20% standard was actually established by the Senate Energy Committee last year, but it's designed to be consistent with the requirements for other net metering structures. So,
Follow. But I just want to make sure I'm understanding, but we're moving that number up to 5 megawatts now from 1, so that has a greater impact on that 20%. You see my point?
yes, except in section 1 of the bill, which is Senator Lang made reference to on an annual basis, the goal is to construct a facility that matches the annual consumption.
Yeah, I'm trying to match all those together.
Yeah, I know.
That's
There's a
what I'm trying to
complexity
make
to
sure.
it.
Okay.
So, but we can work
I
with
think
you.
we're fine. I was just
Yeah.
trying to make sure I understood it.
Right, and what we're trying to do is make sure that, it lines up with other provisions in net metering for individuals and municipalities and the state government. So,
Okay, thank you.
okay, great.
Other questions?
And, as I said, this is not necessarily a new matter to this committee. Senator Pearl, you may remember that you were a co-sponsor of House Bill, I think 1420, when you were a House member that attempted to make this change, and that was a provision that you may recall was supported by what was then, I think, the Office of Strategic Initiatives. Matt Mayu had put the proposal together to address this issue. It was presented to the House ST&E committee. They didn't pass that because they wanted to lift the cap to 5 megawatts for everyone. And then the bill, this matter came back last year as a part of Senate Bill 262, which had 5 or 6 sections in it. Senator Avard and Perkins Coker at the time worked to develop the language in that bill, which is similar to what you see here today. But then in the House, the ST&E committee passed some sections of 262, but not this provision. So we thought it was best to come back with it not part of a big comprehensive package, but on its own, because it really is a distinct group of customers that are impacted by it.
I do remember. I remember all of the work we put into that, and
Yep.
I appreciate the reminder. I didn't have all the bill numbers. in
Yeah,
my
no,
head.
it was well worth the work, which is why we're trying to come back and address it now, particularly when, the manufacturing base is turning because of, the competitive issues Senator Lang talked about, the global requirements, and also the emergence of the Inflation Reduction Act and all the potential tax credits that are going to come to people that deploy clean energy moving forward. We don't want to create an environment where they can't get to those things. They don't pencil out correctly, so we're attempting to change it here. Finally, let me just say, because I think we have seen this addressed in some other net metering issues. As I said, there is a proceeding going on at the Public Utilities Commission. It primarily deals with the issue of what the rate of the credit should be. So we have heard in the past, last year, I don't know if we're going to hear it today, that why don't we just wait for the Public Utilities Commission to finish that work, and then we'll deal with that. And to be honest with you, that's a frustrating argument that we hear, because we have started trying to deal with this issue from so many years ago. And and very tough to talk to a manufacturer and say that this process has been going on for a long time. They just want to know, if I produce electricity and when on nights and weekends as a netting event, if I export it into the market, what can I get a fair price for that? What it's going to be? And frankly, the state government in New Hampshire has taken too long in this. The process of setting that rate has lasted longer than World War II. Back in 2017 is when we tried to begin to figure out a effective rate on that. So I think it would be, I think part of my advocacy is we want the legislature to lean in on this. to not say we have to wait for the Public Utilities Commission to develop the rate. We can, and then come back here next year and say, okay, we have the rate, now we'll change the volume. We think we can advance it moving forward. We don't necessarily have to wait for the PSC to finish that work. When they finish it, things will line up. We'll know that these manufacturers can build to a 5 megawatt level, and they will be able to pencil it out because they'll know what the rate is. We won't have to go back to them and say, Lucy's holding the football, and we're going to, we're really going to give you the rate this time. We're really going to give you the permission. We think this is a good year to move forward on it. And finally, it's an incremental change in net metering. We're not asking to lift the cap on group net metering comprehensively. I know Senate Bill 68 and 69 make some incremental changes. This makes an incremental change as well.
I think, thank you very much for your testimony. I think another wrinkle here is that one of the things that we didn't consider in the past was the fact that storage is another issue.
Mhm.
And I believe Worthing was considering, they're from Nashua, yeah. I think they have about a megawatt, and one of the considerations, they hadn't done it yet, was the fact, well, if we can expand in the future, maybe we can also store that energy that we're not using on the weekends, so that they're using more of that 20%, if you will, going to storage. We did a study a little while back, and storage was not part of the conversation, and now it is. And so that's one of the things that, looking at a vacuum, I mean, you can look at this very myopically, but then you have to look at the big picture. And I'm not preaching at you, I'm just saying.
That's okay.
Is that in all consideration, if they do generate more, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go out into the grid. It could actually go into storage.
Yeah, I think for companies like Hitchner, that might
I'm not here.
that might make sense because they have the wherewithal to invest in on-site storage. To other manufacturers, they might look at the grid as a giant battery, right? So the storage for them is the entire system. They export when they don't need it. When they produce their own, they have it. So I think you're right. It was okay to preach me. What's the saying? If you don't preach to the choir, they don't sing on Sundays. So.
That could be true.
Yeah. So I think it's a good observation. But again, it's just that's a tool that larger manufacturers like Hitchner are looking at, and I think it would complement the what's proposed in Senate Bill 79.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Sam.
Once again, Sam Evans Brown, Clean Energy New Hampshire. We are supportive of this bill. I think we will be sending in some written testimony via email, so I don't have it on hand. But in particular, what I want to draw out for the committee is just how small of a change this is. There's been concern about opening the gate too quickly to net metering in New Hampshire and seeing sort of a gold rush of out-of-state companies coming in. The number of New Hampshire manufacturers that have enough load to build a 5 megawatt array is pretty small. I don't have an absolute number that I can give you here, but I can tell you that we're talking about on the order of dozens, definitely not hundreds. So if the concern is that if net metering is expanded too quickly before we have a real handle on what the implications of that will be for the distribution grid, this is not the bill that's going to result in that kind of a flood. And in particular, I think it's an important bill to consider because of what we have seen with energy rates in the past year, that New Hampshire manufacturers are the industry that is most exposed to energy rates negatively impacting their business model, and this is a tool that we can give those manufacturers in their toolbox to remain competitive with parts of the country that have lower energy rates. So if the committee has concerns, happy to work with stakeholders to try to improve this bill. But I really do think we're talking about a small incremental expansion of a program that has shown results in terms of folks being able to take control of their energy bills.
Senator Waters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Sam. So just kind of three related questions. First, it seems pretty clear over the last few years that it really is the 5 megawatts that's the sweet spot for investment and for the practicality for users.
Yeah, and there. So if I'm not sure if that's the end of your question. I'm happy to
was the
sort of
first.
vamp. Yeah. There's a couple reasons why we've talked about in this committee the fact that between sort of 2 and 5 megawatts, you really start to achieve the kind of scale that allows for the cost of interconnection to be amortized over a larger project and more production. You have the crews on site in one site as opposed to having to go to multiple sites. But then there's also jurisdictional reasons why 5 megawatts really is the more logical cutoff than 1, which is that when you look at what ISO New England considers something to be a project that falls under their purview and needs access to the markets, it's that 5 megawatt cutoff that they say smaller than that, don't bother us, please. And so, that leads to the donut hole that Jim Monahan described, where between 1 and 5 in New Hampshire, it's really, there is no real way to monetize that type of a project.
If I may. Yeah, and secondly, just, not really a rhetorical question, but in a way, if we've demonstrated that this is good for municipalities and it saves them money, then why shouldn't it be good for our businesses too?
I think I would add to that by saying that when you look at the Veeder study, what the study really says is that concerns about cost shift are minimized by siting generation with load. And so when we're talking about large manufacturers, that's exactly what we're talking about. So there really is a fairly minimal concern for cost shift for these types of projects.
And my last one, Mr. Chairman, is this. In terms of what we hear from the BIA and from businesses, it has been, back to John Olson, the litany of concerns about manufacturing staying in our state because of high energy costs. Now, that litany has now been joined over the last few years, certainly by concerns about workforce and about housing. But, wouldn't it be fair to say that we are going to create a crisis for our large manufacturers if we don't do something for them on the energy side? And this is a way to get something done.
I actually would have loved to see the BIA here coming up to testify in support of this bill. I think I know that they know about it, and I would encourage if senators are curious to hear their thoughts, I'd encourage you all to reach out to them as well.
Thank you.
All right, everybody see, you have a question?
No, I don't think so.
Senator, questions? Thank you very much for your testimony. BIA, you want to weigh in on this or no?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dave Juvan. I'm a Senior Vice President with the Business and Industry Association. I didn't sign in. I could say we are leaning towards supporting, and perhaps just for clarification, I think we can say we support the bill. As you know, Kirsten Koch normally handles energy issues. She's stuck in Londonderry due to the weather conditions outside, so I was thrown into this without a lot of preparation. I don't have any objection to the characterization of the bill. I know that several of our important manufacturing members are signers to the letter that you received, so I think it would be safe to say that BIA does support this and recognizes that the cost shifting issues that we have often articulated would be minimal if there is any at all with this legislation. That's about the best I can do this morning.
You did a good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Well, I have one speaker left, and everybody seems to love it, so I'll leave it up to you, Josh, to rain on our parade.
It's what the department does best. So, for the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs for the New Hampshire Department of Energy. The department is opposed to this bill. I know will come as a tremendous shock to most of you. Again, I know the references have been made to the existing ongoing docket at the Public Utilities Commission. Again, that is 22-060, which will be looking at this at a holistic approach. If you're looking at the language, again, it's the end of line 6 through 7 to line the beginning of line 8. that deals with the increased cap to 5 megawatts. In addition, this is something that hasn't been discussed, that you also see the struck out language starting on line 8 through line 9 that takes out the behind the meter requirement. So these, in theories, these locations, these facilities could be located anywhere. They don't have to be behind the meter anymore, which means any of those savings from, potential savings from cost for transmission or distribution don't necessarily exist. If you could have this thing in another state, honestly, based on the way that it's written, you could have it in Arizona. It doesn't, there's nothing requiring it to be within even the same utility service territory, which would make it incredibly difficult for net metering to actually occur because that utility is not going to have any insight as to what is being generated on that facility. Now, if you see most of the net metering, either it's group host or any of the sort of the other mechanisms, there's always a requirement that they be in the same utility service territory in order to allow basically those insights to happen sort of at the utility. So in that regard, it really, again, separates customer from customer generator, right? You just have a generating facility somewhere, that literally anywhere, versus actually on site behind the meter. If that's the request, or if that's a request of a project, you could easily do a group host net metering arrangement, or just be a group of one. But you could sort of separate that out without just essentially having generators, basically power plants functioning as power plants without any behind the load requirements. So moving on, so again, they could either solve that problem, either doing group host net metering or doing a purchase power agreement. Moving on to section 2 of the bill, again, there's a little bit of the confusion because you have the 20% requirement, but there's also the 100% peak requirement in section 1. Depending on what kind of facility it is. And then in subsection B, starting on line 20, that definition in PUC rule is actually of LMI community solar project. So I would just draw your attention to the fact that this issue had been addressed in Senate Bill 161, dealing with, where we're working with community, local housing authorities in order to be able to actually be eligible for the LMI grant program as well as the adder, that this addition of this language here could get complicated because then you're referring to a definition in rules, which through the process there would be granted a rules waiver, but through this we would get stuck and not be able to. You would basically be codifying what the current definition is in rules, which is counter to what was passed in 161. So with that, I'm happy to stop and happy to take questions.
How would you fix that?
Well, you could take it out entirely. You could just have it, you could just define what you consider a low moderate income. You could refer to the statute. You could do a couple of other things rather than referring to rule.
And putting the line back in that was crossed out, would that make you at least neutral on the bill?
No, we'd still have, again, the objection to the 5 megawatt cap. Well, essentially it comes down to, I know people have talked about the VDRS. It did find that cost shifting does exist. It is 1%. It is a small amount. I will concede that. There's the question of whether or not that should dictate what the tariff should be for the rest of the those folks who net meter. There's certainly a question of equity. Should a business get a faster rate of return on a net metering installation at the expense of a single mom who's in Manchester who's on the electric assistance program? That's what the department's objections come down to. Now, the purpose of the VDRS is to come together, of the docket is to come to find that right tariff for all of those different facilities that are net metering at a higher rate. Now, again, I know it has been mentioned, these facilities right now, if there's an industry that wants to build a facility behind the meter, if they want to go up to 5 megawatts, they want to go to 4.99, they can do that. There's nothing in state law prohibiting them from doing that right now. If they want to do that, they can do that today. The question is what they get credited for their exports. If it's anything over that 1 megawatt, they get paid whatever the wholesale rate is. And that's just the power, whatever the price of power happens to be on that day. We talk a lot about, in Senate Bill 165, on 166, with, talking about the temporal cost of electricity. That's also a question there. They're paying in, they're responding to price demands, and they can either export, or Senator Abard's point, if they want to invest in storage, they can do that as well.
Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Yeah, thanks, Josh, for your testimony. So would you agree that the legislature is the policy-setting body and that we consider issues of the public good?
Yes, I believe I've testified to agree to that fact in the past. Yes.
Thank you.
Further questions? Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for taking my question. I want to go back to when you were talking about line 9 and that the striking of the located behind a retail meter. If that were added back in, would that assuage some of the department's concerns?
I think it would, at least for the mechanics, if the committee were to decide to act on this bill, it would remove a number of just the purely mechanical, regardless of however the department feels or however we feel about the 5 megawatts.
Sure.
It would remove a lot of the mechanical issues, because right now, as it's written, again, that generation facility could be located in another state on the other side of the country, and there's no real way for the utilities to actually figure out what's netted out.
Thank you.
And section B under 4 would be if I don't know if the need of that is there, but would that also make you a little more comfortable?
It would certainly not contradict what you're
Right.
attempting to do in Senate Bill 161.
Right. B on the bottom of the page, line 20. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none. Senator Lang, any concerns about line, are you really sold on B and line 9? 20 and 9.
Thank you, Senator. So your question is adding back in that language about located behind the meter and getting rid of 20? I believe in incrementalism. If that'll make the bill better and pass this body, I'd be happy to accept it because I think it'd be better for our manufacturers.
Jim?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to quickly I think the section that you're talking about removing the line about the
Consumption requirements.
yeah, the off-site activity. Let me just say, as you can probably appreciate, there are some manufacturers that, for example, if you have an electric furnace because you're using aluminum and things like that, you don't have a very big footprint, but you have a big electricity need. And so the reason that the off-site opportunity is being sought here is so if you don't have the roof space to meet your load, but you own a piece of property somewhere else, you'd be able to do it. So I think that's the concept there, that if you don't have the roof space but you're still a single customer, I don't think we're talking about being able to locate it in Arizona and move there. So with that said, and as a general matter, I'm happy to work with the committee. I really want to get Josh Elliott to yes on this. And so I think there's a combination of fixing some of the mechanical issues so it would work well. And then with all of you, I think we can get them to say, yeah, let's let the legislature figure this out.
Senator Pearl and then Senator Waters.
I think if we could get Josh to a neutral position, we've really moved the
I'm
marker.
aspirational this morning, Senator.
If we were to add something to the effect of where you struck out, that it required it to be in the same service
Yeah,
area,
that's
would
the
you
type
be
of
okay
thing
with
where I
that?
think is a
Because
practical
that takes away the wide open Arizona argument at least.
Yes, before I agree to that, I want to check with the
Yeah.
engineers at revision to make sure that whatever changes they have here, we don't create.
He also mentioned line 6 on the megawatt of 100% of customer aggregate. I believe it was line 6, correct, Josh?
Yes.
Yeah. And there was a concern there, but it was in contradiction, I guess, to B? Or,
Well,
No,
I'm
I'm
happy
sorry.
to. I don't want to.
yeah.
And I'm sure you don't either want to try to figure it out at the table today. I'll work with the
I do.
Department of Ed. I
Yeah.
know you, again,
All right,
aspirational.
well, we'll look, we'll wait for some more comments, but I think this is it's got some merit, we want to make sure that we can,
Great, thank
we
you.
can work with all the parties. Further questions? Seeing none? Thank you, Josh. I do appreciate you.
Somebody's got to do
Yeah, no. No further questions. We'll close the hearing on this and we'll move on to the next. Lo and behold, it's Senator Lang. It's your day today.
This is my last one. I'm done. I'm going back to education.
Oh, I like all the co-sponsors.
Thank you, members of the committee. Again, Senator Lang from Senate District 2. I'm introducing Senate Bill 96 relative to state energy performance contracting. So the reason this bill was brought forward was, again, it appeared that in some municipalities, there was some language being added to RFP processes that were automatically excluding vendors that would otherwise be allowed to participate. And probably the most, I'm going to use an analogy because I don't know the energy performance contracting industry enough to know which organizations, but imagine if your town said, oh, by the way, only people that can submit for this RFP are people that belong to the Greater Laconia Chamber of Commerce, right? And that was a requirement to be able to even submit an RFP. I think we'd all say that membership in a private organization shouldn't be a condition of being able to participate in government contracting. And this bill seeks to fix that. So as to make sure that, specifically in the industry, my understanding was there were some requirements to force people to belong to certain private organizations in the energy division, as well as using some specifically proprietary tools that are unavailable to, say, one company versus another one, because it was contracted specifically into the bill when the other company could do the work, just not using that tool. And so the idea behind it was to make it clear that in government contracting that it's an open bid process, that membership in private organizations should not be required, nor should we set it so that proprietary tools are specified within the contracting language, that if another business seems like it can do the job without the use of the proprietary tool, they should be allowed to bid and explain their bid to the members. That's it. That's the whole bill. Just cleans up the language to make it more open for the bidding process in our contracts.
Senator Waters with a question.
Thank Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. So my question is on line 9, accreditation. So why I worry a little bit about that one is that we are dealing oftentimes with systems that we want to make sure they're safe. And one of the ways to do that is that you're accredited. Like if I have somebody who works on a steam boiler in my house or electrical, what kind of accreditation is there that gives me the confidence that this person can do the work safely? So I wondered if that is, I think it's different from required membership, and I wonder if accreditation really is perhaps meaning that we would open consumers and municipalities to potentially having to contract with someone who we can't have safe practices.
Thank you, Senator, for your question. So again, due diligence is important. And that's a fine question when you're interviewing your RFP candidates for what they're providing and to make sure they can do it. Again, I'll go back to the argument that if I'm hiring an electrician for the town, should I require they be a member of the Chamber of Commerce? Should I require they have an A rating in the Better Business Bureau, right? So the question is, it's a private organization that's doing something that someone may come in and say, well, I'm not a member of the Laconia Chamber of Commerce, but I am a member of the Concord Chamber of Commerce, but by the contract provision, I would be not allowed to participate because you've narrowed the specifications so much.
I get that. That's not a problem for me, but I want to know that the electrician is coming on, because I can't, if I'm a municipality and I've got a contract with someone, I don't know the code, you know what I'm saying? How would I know to question that person whether or not they know the code when they're going to do this and will follow those standards? And that's why we have accreditation for this. I don't have the membership stuff, I don't have a problem with. The accreditation one, I just think there's some red flags with that.
So again, Senator, if I may, so licensing is different than accreditation, right? So again, if I'm hiring an electrician, are you certified by the mechanical board here in the state of New Hampshire, right? So that is a legitimate question, right? And you can, that's a state agency. So again, this isn't a private organization and private membership, right? So that's a state agency that says that, no, you have to be licensed by the state of New Hampshire. You can include that in your contracting because that's reasonable, right? We have that provision. So again, that's different than saying, are you a member of the Better Business Bureau or Laconia Chamber of Commerce?
Well, thank you. Maybe you need a definition of accreditation here in the bill.
Question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator, for taking my question. Actually, I have two questions. Clearly, this is written to solve a problem that people are, from my understanding of your testimony, there are people who are being barred or marginalized out of the process. Is that what I'm hearing? So what are these regional, national, or international energy services organizations? Because it's not chambers. It's not something that
Right, I tried to put it
hyperlocal.
to something we understood that was a little bit better, because I
but
don't
what are they?
specifically know, but there'll be, I'm
Yeah.
sure there's someone testifying who'll be able to answer those questions that going forward. It was brought to me and the example was given to me, and this was the language that was done, but I don't recall off the top of my head what those organizations were, but I'm sure there's someone behind me who can answer that question.
Thank you. And
Follow-up?
my second question is the use of equipment that is not generally available to energy service companies. What does that mean?
So again, Matt, thank you, Senator, for the question. So again, the question is proprietary equipment. So some companies build their own equipment, so to speak, and they don't allow it. So again, I'm going to try to make it more specific, for more generalized for you, so you understand. And I can
You
explain
just tell
it
me
easier.
what the
Well,
equipment
I don't
is.
know the equipment, so I'll
Oh,
be honest, I
okay.
don't know the equipment. But the example would be a piece of software that you specify. You say you must use this, and but it's a closed piece of software that's only available to one company, right? So you've narrowed the entire contracting to one company, and that's what this is trying not to do, is to narrow it down that a city, a state, or a city or a town or county could write a provision that's really geared towards one company. There's only one company that can do it because of the specification that was put into the contract. And so they're steering the contract in such a way by contracting language to a specific company.
Senator Waters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I forgot this question. So this is on line 12. The phrase "purposes of bias or favoritism." I see that phrase, and I see it just the festival of billable hours. You know, I mean, anybody who loses a contract and says that there was bias or favoritism in the terms that you use, oh my God, how would you ever determine that?
So thank you for the question again. So I think it was the end of my last question. My last answer was it, right? Again, you write the contract in such a way that it steers due to your using proprietary, specifying specific proprietary equipment that's only available to one company. You've might as well just issue the contract to the one company and not do the RFP process, right? So you specifically steered to show favoritism towards a specific company rather than see if there's another way of doing it and opening the RFP process to other companies. So I think if you were to do that, again, write a specific saying that you only use this widget, and that widget is only available from company A, company B and C can't even compete for the job, and it shows favoritism towards company A if B and C can have a legitimate alternative to that piece of equipment. But you've narrowed it down so tight that you've made it so B and C can't even submit an RFP because they don't meet the conditions of the contract, of the RFP.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you, Senator. We appreciate your time.
The trial lawyers will thank me.
All right. Mike? You're not a trial lawyer, are you, Mike? I'm not a trial lawyer at all.
My name is Mike Davies. I'm a project
One fix right there.
Press the button, sorry. My name is Mike Davey. I'm a project manager for Energy Efficient Investments. We're a Merrimack, New Hampshire-based energy efficiency company. We have 48 employees, and our headquarters are in Merrimack. I live in Manchester as well, so we're a New Hampshire owned and operated company. We currently do projects for municipalities and businesses throughout the state, including the city of Manchester, New Hampshire, where we've been doing work with them for 10 years. We're on our third phase of projects with the city of Nashua. We've done consulting for the Stratham School District in Exeter, Portsmouth School District. We were awarded a performance contract with the University of New Hampshire in Durham. Sometimes RFP language will come out. For example, Keene State issued an RFP that said you must be an accredited member of NASCO, which is a National Association of Performance Contractors or Energy Services Contractors, and you must have 10 years experience within that organization. We are a local regional company, so with New Hampshire professional engineers, we hire New Hampshire licensed gas fitters, New Hampshire licensed plumbers, and spending significant amount of our income to join a national organization that has board members of our competitors on it isn't something that we thought. We think it's a great organization, but to be forced to join that company, be certified by them to bid on something at Keene State, we didn't think was it fair or in the live free or die nature of our state. And so we don't mind them asking about accreditation during the RFP, but we don't want it to say you can't bid, which was the case with Keene State. We could not submit a proposal to Keene State, even though we had a contract for University of New Hampshire Durham, even though we had the city of Manchester, Nashua, and the Keene School District. So it just didn't make sense. We can prove that if Keene State needs to know if we can do this work, they can ask the Keene School District, where we've been working for 10 years. And so I don't think it was done with malice. I think they just grabbed an RFP from a similar university that might work with one of these big national companies, and then now you're excluding us. We've also seen this language creep into proposals in the city of Nashua. So Nashua did an RFP. We asked, could we submit on it, even without this accreditation? They said yes. However, once they awarded it, the other companies challenged and said they didn't meet the criteria. So then Nashua actually had to reissue the RFP. It delayed the project for 3 years, cost us lots of time, effort, and money, and delayed the project. So we're not against this accreditation. We're not against them asking it. We just don't think it should be required to bid, especially Keene State asking for 10 years experience. Like, how could you ever be a startup in this industry if you wanted to open a similar business in New Hampshire, if they're requiring 10 years experience to even bid on anything? We've also seen the proprietary equipment. A lot of times it's actually in the thermostat, or what you call the HVAC controls. And so we'll see RFPs come out that say you must have a Johnson Controls system. Well, Johnson Controls is a great company, but they also are a performance contractor, and it gives them a huge advantage, or maybe we can't even bid without, if they're bidding on it. So, again, I don't think it's in the best interest of the municipalities or the state agencies to freeze out local New Hampshire businesses from at least submitting a response, and then they can decide whether or not we're qualified, but we should at least be able to submit a response.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee?
Yeah.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, in hearing your description on line 11 and having heard Senator Lang, you're really getting at proprietary equipment. So, would it make sense just to say that? Because I don't know what it means generally available. I wouldn't have a clue what that actually means. A proprietary, I understand.
So there are certain equipment that to give us a specific example, there's certain equipment like thermostats that maybe they're proprietary, maybe they're not, but they have a distributor agreement with a certain vendor. So, for example, Schneider Controls. They're a French manufacturer. There's a controls company in Bow that has an exclusive right to sell that product, and they're in New Hampshire, so they have a service territory. So if the city of Dover issued an RFP and said you must use Schneider Controls, it gives a huge advantage to that company, basically. So whether it's fully proprietary or not, that's I think what that part of it is getting at.
Oh,
No, thank you.
thank you for your testimony. Sam?
Hi, folks, one last time. For full disclosure, EEI is a Clean Energy New Hampshire member company. In doing my due diligence on this bill before deciding that it was something that we would support, I did reach out to a number of other energy service companies and just had conversations with folks there. And what I'd say I learned in my fact finding is that bigger companies did not have a problem with these types of RFP restrictions, and smaller companies did have a problem with them. And so I think that generally speaking, the ESCO arena does have a lot of very large actors. Companies like Siemens, for instance, that do have an interest in trying to put up barriers to entry to smaller actors. It's worth pointing out that this statute, actually, there's a similar statute in Maine already that has been passed and that is in effect. And I don't think that we've seen, projects that have resulted in boilers exploding and, thermostats going haywire because of the existence of that statute. So as I said, having done that due diligence, I think that really the question is here. You can ask about accreditation and membership that a company has. It really shouldn't be required, is really what I think this bill is trying to do.
All right, questions from the committee?
If I may.
Senator Waters?
Does the main statute, to the best of your recollection, include the language in line 12, purposes of bias or favoritism?
So I don't have it memorized. I'd be happy to send the language to the committee after the hearing.
And if I may,
Yep.
do you think that the language on line 11
Generally
is
available.
clear enough about generally available to service? Service companies, and let me just lay that out a little bit, because essentially what, I could see, you heard me about the proprietary, and I kind of see that. But the answer that I got from the previous person was to say, well, now the problem has gone into service company agreements with manufacturers, and it's asking us, in a sense, to really get down into how businesses, get their pricing and do their contracts with manufacturers and so on. And that starts to make me a little nervous that we're really going to get down into that level of management or manipulation of how businesses are run. So I don't know. I just, do you think there's any language there which might get to the point without raising some of the issues I have?
I do think that we could probably find alternative language if we were to sit down with a group. This really is a very specialized field, right? There are not a ton of ESCOs out there, generally speaking, and so I would want to defer to folks who know that industry a little better before trying to search around for language. But I would bet you that if we sat down, we could come up with something that might allay some of those concerns.
Maybe you could send us the main.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
All right, any further questions? Seeing none. Our last speaker, Josh. Neutral. All right, making progress this morning.
Hey, someone has to be the state agency official, right? Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs, Department of Energy. Department is neutral on this bill. A lot of good discussion here on this language. Certainly, it appears to be that there is a situation of where there are restrictive RFPs. As somebody who does have to issue RFPs on behalf of the department, that's something you always need to take care of. That you're not deliberately trying to steer it towards one particular company in order to win the bid. So with that being said, the first clause, request for qualifications, not contain terms that require membership in or accreditation from a specific regional, et cetera, up to that semicolon. No objections to that. That seems to make sense to us, that you don't say, as I think the Chamber of Commerce example, or the national versus a regional thing, as long as that there's some sort of accreditation you can point to that shows you're actually qualified to do this kind of work. Senator Waters, I actually had written down before you asked the question about inserting the word proprietary in front of equipment to clarify that. Understanding, I know there's, as you had mentioned in your other questions, so the discussion around that. The one counter I could see to that is, say, for example, say I own a bunch of buildings, and I'm going to use my own name. Say Elliott Controls is the one who I have their equipment all in the rest of my building. So in this last building I want to make sure that they function with all of the other control systems that I already have in place. How you thread that needle between making sure you have consistency or interoperability with your existing systems versus being deliberately exclusionary, I think would require some work to thread that needle. Unfortunately, I don't have any suggestions as to how to thread that needle, but I would want to make sure that that flexibility is given if folks wanted to or needed consistency in sort of the control systems, for example, or other sorts of equipment across their facilities. And again, actually, to Senator Waters' earlier point, the last clause about terms that are otherwise included for the purposes of bias or favoritism towards a particular energy services company, we would have concerns with that just because of how broad it is, and that anything could really be laid as a term of bias or favoritism. I don't know how. Perhaps either striking entirely or perhaps getting more specific as to what would be considered bias or favoritism, just so you don't have a bunch of frivolous complaints against anyone trying to issue an RFP by somebody who's not one of the winning bidders. So either further definition or striking that entirely might be the best course of action. I will say, as is currently written, this is in the DAS statutes. And by looking at the further review of how agency is defined in this section, that this would only apply to the state, and then other things that are considered agencies. I'm not an attorney, but depending on how you read the definition of agency, you could probably consider that the university system would be considered as in that definition of agency. So I would suggest further review of that. However, it is clear that this would not apply to municipalities or other local units of local government. So if that was the intention of the committee to do that, you would need either sort of similar language in another section of statute, because this just deals with DAS. So to deal with the municipalities, you probably need a separate section of statute. I'm sure OLS could suggest it if that's the will of the committee.
Thank you, Josh. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we don't have anybody else to speak on this. Any trial lawyers want to talk about this? Seeing none, close the hearing on 96, and we'll listen to the prime sponsor on SB 16. Senator Waters, you are recognized when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator David Waters, District 4, Senate Bill 16, establishing a stakeholders group. And the history of this, you'll see what it does. It establishes a stakeholder group with appropriate people on it to get at basically two issues about the removal of derelict poles and in a timely way. But then also providing information through a certain platform to municipalities and others, so that the process of getting the offending pole dealt with could be made more efficient. This bill comes out of Representative Grote's study committee bill from last year, which established this committee. She put in that bill about this issue because of the numerous complaints from around the state about utility poles or parts thereof which had not been removed after another pole had been set. If you drive around your communities, you'll see them. And sometimes just temporary, and there's a surprisingly extensive process whereby anybody who has any wire or anything else on that pole has to go through their own work orders and coordinate doing that. And I guess that just plain stalls out sometimes, or that everybody's done something but one person has. And it's very hard for municipalities or others to know where the process is and who hasn't done what they need to do. And so there the pole sits. And we heard one case was across a farmer's land, other cases where they're in, municipalities, downtowns, and so on. So after a lot of meetings and discussion, it was decided by the utilities and other folks that this was the best way to go. So let's set up the stakeholder group. They already have a kind of an informal one. They do talk to each other, but let's have the stakeholder group, and it could do a couple of things. It could, first, you see here this system called NGUNS. This is a way to trace for each pole in the state what the situation is, yet the access to that is limited in various ways, and some people don't like that system so much. So the question here is, well, okay, what kind of data system can be made available to municipalities and others so that they actually know what is going on, and if a complaint is registered, there's a way to get that into the systems. And then the focus on attachment identification and pole location information so that people would actually know, because the tag is on the pole, who has wiring on it and who has to be contacted about something that's got to be done, and who has what poles where throughout the state, and then this issue of the transfers on E. So this would be good duties to have for the group, and we'll get reports about it. And I think that Representative Grody, in particular concern, and Representative Cambrils and others on the committee, was to make sure that something gets done, and that's why we need the reports. And if this group isn't taking care of it, then there are other options that we discussed in the study that would be more directive, but we thought that we could perhaps trust the partners here to come up with a good way to do things. So, Mr. Chairman, more than you ever wanted to hear about utility poles.
I'm sure we're going to hear more. Thank you, Senator. Questions from the committee? Seeing none? All right. So I don't have anybody else to speak on this. Does anybody else want to? Hang on. Anybody else before the department weighs in on this? Okay, we're going to have you as our last speaker, Josh.
Oh, phew, you scared me for a minute, Mr. Chairman. I thought we weren't going to hear from Josh.
No, we're definitely going to hear from Josh. And look at this.
And a guest.
He's in the middle.
Yes.
Good for you.
Welcome. So, again, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs, and with me I have...
I'm Paul Casper, and I'm the Director of the Division of Enforcement for the New Hampshire Department of Energy.
Welcome.
So as mentioned, Paul is specifically mentioned as the leader of the stakeholder group dealing with these double pole issues, triple poles, etc. I will say I never really given much thought to this issue until they had done some pole replacement along Route 13 on my commute into Concord every day. And it's very noticeable, like until they sort of blend in. But once you notice them, you can't not see them after that. Actually, I have even an elusive triple pole in my commute. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking. Paul Casper is certainly the expert here, so I'm going to have him take it from here.
Senators, this is a very huge problem for the state of New Hampshire, and not just New Hampshire, throughout the country, double poles. I get a lot of calls from different towns, road agents, customers that are complaining about double poles or sometimes even triple poles. And double and triple poles are generated in a couple of different ways. It can be make-ready work. Normally, it's either the electric utility or the communication utility that owns the pole, or jointly or separately, and they're responsible for the sets. So make-ready work would be, as an example, Eversource, who has the lion's share of poles in the state, gets contacted that the communications people, we have Breeze Line, we have all of these fiber companies that are coming along. So they have to put a taller pole in so that there's more space for telecom wire to go on. The other issue becomes poles that get hit. And just to give you a brief example, so this past Christmas, the weekend before Christmas and Christmas weekend, we're all aware what happened. We had some pretty serious outages in New Hampshire. And a rough guesstimate, they replaced approximately 800 poles on the state from those two storms. Now, let's say they didn't do a complete transfer, so we have basically 800 new double poles. Some of them probably are not double poles because they were, damaged to the point where they had to be transferred. The problem becomes, as Senator Waters said, most utilities, most people are involved with engines. It's a system that has worked well throughout the years. What happens though now, the electric utilities always transfer first. There's, inevitably, whether it's their set or not, they have to transfer the electric side. And what happens is they set the new pole and they usually lash or lag the damaged pole to the new one. They transfer, and through engines, they notify the next in line, the next one to transfer.
No pun intended.
Correct. And it could be, primarily it could be cable TV or one of the fiber companies. And as you come down the pole, you'll get to the telecom company, where they're consolidated. And sometimes even some towns have their fire department alarm systems are attached. So nobody can transfer until the one above them transfers. Well, it stops. You have all these double poles. Well, all of a sudden, Eversource, through engines, notifies the next one to transfer. Well, it's not expeditious in any way, because again, like Josh just said, just drive around a 3-block radius around this building. I'd take a guess you could probably find 5 to 10 double poles. So maybe at the end of the day, as you're driving home, you'll probably notice them.
Now I'm going to.
Well, so
And then I'm
one of
gonna
my
tell my wife,
coworkers,
look.
one of my coworkers Friday morning come in to me, and he said, "I'm going to give you some pictures." He says, "I noticed this double pole." He said, on my way to work, and I actually ended up calling Eversource. I wasn't their set, but I knew if I called them, they'd at least send a troubleman out there to take a look at it. It was in pretty tough shape. Looked like it needed some immediate attention, and it did. So they contacted Consolidated. We have triple poles. That means that there was already 2 there. It could be there was another accident, hit the old pole that was waiting to be transferred now, or the new one. So now we have a 3rd pole.
Maybe we should put bumpers in front of them.
I'm sorry, sir.
Maybe we should put bumpers in front of them instead of another pole.
There are, what happens is the utilities they have a tendency now to put reflectors on the poles that are hit more often. So it's an interesting.
So do you like this bill? I mean, do you think the way it's written?
I'm sorry, sir.
Do you like this bill the way it is written?
I do. I do because I think it's a way of getting everybody to the table and at least have the discussion in an organized manner. I'm sure some of the utilities feel that there's really no problem. Well, in my opinion, from what I experience on a daily basis, there is a problem. And the biggest concern for me is safety. I actually have a photo in here of a pole that was replaced 10 years ago, and it finally got transferred back in November of 2022. Now, I find that a little excessive for waiting. And there was only Unitil and the telephone company on this pole. Unitil set of new pole transferred, and 10 years later, telephone finally transferred.
It's because everybody's going wireless.
It-
I'll stop interrupting you. But, so within this bill, this helps correct the situation?
Well, I think it'll at least get to the root cause.
Yeah.
It, from working with Senator Waters on the commission initially with Representative Grody, it's, a lot of things came to light, who's on the pole? Well, if we can come to the table on a monthly basis, all the stakeholders, and at least, okay, what's the solution? Anybody have a better idea? Is there something better than engines that we could use? I've talked to counterparts, my counterparts throughout the country, and one of the gentlemen from the state of Washington, we had a very long discussion, and they kind of brought everybody to the table in a similar manner, and had all the telecom companies agree that they would have a single contract to transfer all the telecom stuff. And they would, split the cost of that transfer. That was one solution. He says it reduced them immensely because there's no waiting. Because right now, like I said, you can tell just by driving around if you see double poles. Look at the color. A brand new pole that was just set is going to be kind of brown or greenish looking. You see something that's pretty weathered, means it's been there a while. So a lot of these double poles, and I have a lot of photos here, they're pretty weathered, so that kind of is an indication. They've been sitting there a while waiting to be transferred. I don't know what the problem is. I talk to the utilities all the time and the telecom companies, and I've actually stopped and had chats with some of the fiber companies. It's like, well, we're waiting for the next person above us. And we have chunky poles. That's a term that we use. You'll drive by and you'll just see a section of pole like this. That's all, and it's lashed against the new pole. That's their version of a fix for some people. Well, we'll just people above already transferred, people below transferred, and we'll just lash this up against the new pole.
Put a birdhouse on it.
Yep. The other problem, senators, with double poles, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to ask, are there questions from the committee? Okay.
You can flash them and then put them
No, I'm sorry. No, you're more than welcome to have them.
Okay. I think we got the gist of it. So while she's looking at the pictures, are there questions from the committee? Seeing none? Senator Josh.
I would just add, I think this is a great way. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? If there's a constant stakeholder group that's looking at this, it brings it to the forefront, and everybody keeps talking about it and can find a solution to this. This is vehicle for this. I will add, the employee he was talking about was Griffin Roberge.
Oh, was it? Well, he's not welcome here anymore. He left us. No, we actually love Griffin. Good. So with that, thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. Thank you, Josh. And we have nobody else signed up to speak on this, so we are going to close the hearing. And I entertain a motion to exec. Seconded by Senator Waters. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. And we'll take up this bill, SB 16. Are there any motions?
All to pass.
Seconded by Senator Bertzel. Discussion. All in favor of ought to pass SB 16?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, is there a motion to consent?
Consent.
Senator Waters, consent, seconded by Senator Bertzel. And it is on consent. Senator Waters will take this one out. Congratulations. We're going to get rid of those nasty poles. All right. At least talk about it anyway. I would like to entertain SB 61 while it's fresh on my mind. And
Which one?
61.
So I'll move up to pass.
Okay. SB, seconded by
I gotta get to the right bill first.
61. We've already heard it. It's my bill.
Oh, okay.
And As soon as I get a second, I'll offer a motion.
I'll second.
Okay.
I'm with you now.
All right, now I'm going to, here's an amendment that I've got combined. Senator Mitchell. This is for the Senator.
I'll move 0612S, brought to pass.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, discussion. Basically, before I even get into the guts of it, page 4, line 23, there should be a comma after rules. If we can just put that in instead of a.
Where was that again?
I beg your pardon? No.
So what line is that again?
Line, page
23.
4, line 23. Thank you. After rules, it should be a comma, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. And so this is basically a combination of both our bills, my bill and your bill as well. As you see on line 3, the statement of purpose, protection of perennial rivers, lakes, and coastal waters from contaminations. Findings 2, the general court, that the current rules of the Department of Environmental Services require a thorough hydrogeological investigation of any proposed landfill site, and it addresses certain concerns on that. Let's see here. Department of, Section 2, Department of Environmental Services rules have proven effective in preventing releases of contaminants. That's line 27. Section 3, the 200-foot minimum setback between landfills and perennial surface waters. That's on page 2, line 1. Falls within 3 broad categories. Method to determine the setbacks. The 3 categories of distance-based setback, site-specific, and setbacks and distance-based setbacks that can be reduced to landfill owners through implementing a design which features additional redundancies that the landfill redundancies to landfill environmental protection services. Let's see what else. Any questions so far on that?
Well, I'll make my comments now
Yep.
if you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, as with the original SB 61, I think this is a very thoughtful and appropriate way of getting at the setback issue, which, there's been a lot of discussion about it, over the last couple of years, various bills, and we know there are some House bills. I think this really gets it right in certain ways. The 2 things I would point out is it does incorporate Senate Bill 227, which you remember is my bill that has the study and the appropriation of the groundwater, which we need to do no matter what bill passes. We have to have that study done. And then I think the heart of this bill, Mr. Chairman, is actually on page 4, starting on line 19. Because in a sense, here's the teeth. It says that under section 3 and 4, which include the study of the groundwater,
24 months.
that there will be no permit without
Correct.
in accordance here. And if a permit is in process, then it's held in abeyance, and the applicant, because there's a good timeline here, an appropriate one, then could refile in light of the rules that have been adopted. So I think, Mr. Chairman, you've gotten a good bill together here. I think it gives us a strong Senate position in relationship to the House. The one thing that we've had some conversation about, which I would mention, is that I do think there's some wisdom in passing 227 as well, although it is incorporated here, because then we can get them both over to the House, and if the House does something to this that we don't like, I just think the bottom line is we need that study done. And I think
I do agree with you on that. I was actually going to ask to hold on that and re-refer only for the reason that if this doesn't pass the House, I have another tool to bring forward, because this does incorporate your bill.
Whatever you'd like, Mr. Chairman, on that, on whatever the strategy is fine, but I think we're in complete agreement on how we establish this position.
Yeah.
And what we do for the department needs to have done, so.
Because we'll make sure that whatever happens, that we have an ace up our sleeve is basically what I'm looking at. But that 24 months is also very, very important. No permits will be permitted. And that solves a lot of concerns with a number of issues that people have been raising. So I want to thank everybody, including the department, for their input on this. And further discussion. Senator.
Well, I just want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for putting together a good amendment. I appreciate both of you working together and combining two very important bills and coming up with one piece of legislation we can move forward. And I think I would agree with you that re-referring 227 would be a good move so that we have it as a vehicle later if we need it.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you, Senator Waters. You know, I really appreciate doing a lot of just bipartisan stuff here.
It's the nature of this committee.
And we're hoping that the House sees our example and we can move things along.
I have some questions. Since we're in discussion mode, I had prepared an amendment myself, and I think some of this is incorporated, but since it's rewritten, what I'm looking for is, in the original bill on page 3 was deadline for rulemaking applicability, and where is that put in here? Because I'm quickly trying to go through this.
I know it's in here. Shall apply to its current rule. Is it page 5?
I think that's where,
Line.
yeah, I think
Line-
that's where we have it.
Section 3, page 5.
Okay.
Applying its current rule. What is your amendment
24
do?
months. It's 24 months.
Okay, which,
It's
so
already in the bill.
I see the 24 months. I'm just going to give you the language that I had so that we can all be on the same page discussing. So the 24 months is much more generous than what I had put in. So, okay, awesome. What I'm concerned about is in discussion during the hearing without what I'm worried about are applications that come in prior to these new rules, and that the discussion at that time was that the old rules would be in effect, and that that if we are going to make new rules, the purpose of making new rules is outlined in the statement of purpose, which is an acknowledgement that the old rules are not enough, and so we have to make new ones. And so my concern is that we should not be leaning on what we have already acknowledged to be not enough. And that in my amendment, and I'm hoping that the committee will consider that while the new rules are being developed, that we put a moratorium on any new permits so that we are we have fidelity to the statement of purpose.
But I don't think there's any new permits that are going to be.
Yeah, if you look, Deborah, on page 4.
Page 4.
Lines, 24 is the heart of it. May not issue. Okay, so it's not that they're going to be using the previous rules if something comes in. They may not issue a permit until the rules are done. And I think that's why in your amendment, put aside the 18 months for a second.
Sure.
I think it's all in there. I think your number, your 1 and 2 there, they're in there, in those lines. I think the 18 months, that part of what is driving the going to 24 is the groundwater study.
Sure.
That's going to take a little time because that's some tough science and they've got to do an RFP. So in a way, 18 months or 24 months, I think 24 months is actually better. It means no permits for a longer time.
Oh, I agree.
To really get it. So I think we're there. I think
So-
it's all in here.
Is there can you tell me why you chose not to in line 24, to go with may versus shall?
Who's here from DES?
I don't know in this reading,
It's
personally, that it
necessary.
makes any difference. I think it says the same thing.
They may
They
not.
may not, or they shall not. They still cannot.
Well,
I know the difference between shall and may, but in this reading.
we spend
it's-
inordinate amounts of time in this legislature debating the squishy spaces between may and shall.
I agree.
Twenty-two
but
Yeah.
In this writing, I'm not sure it means anything different.
Any rules adopted by the department under this paragraph shall, in addition to any other factors the department deem necessary for the rules to provide adequate
To me,
protections.
you may not do this doesn't mean you could.
Yeah, so I think that actually, if
Not
you
in
look,
this writing.
if you look up to lines 20, 21,
Mm-hmm.
that may only applies to if the rules are completed in a shorter period of time than 24 months. Okay?
If the rules required are adopted within the 24 months, okay.
Yeah, so let's say it doesn't take the 24 months for them to do rules. Then
So-
if the rules are done, they,
Good luck with that.
yeah.
Without imposing a site-specific setback.
Yeah, you see, so I think what it's saying is that they, you know, I don't, but maybe we could go with shall there, I don't know. if it
What
makes
am
a
I
difference.
missing? They may not issue
I don't wanna mess it
without
up.
imposing a site-specific setback. Well, I mean, if you have to rewrite it to put in a comment, can we rewrite it to change may to shall?
I don't want the shall. I want may.
Okay.
Why is that? Like,
Because
walk
that's-
me through that.
I just did.
I did not understand. Could you, I'm, like, explain to me like I'm 5, because I'm
Okay.
trying to get to, like, the understanding.
I think that we put a lot of time into this bill and a lot of work into it, and I think the may works just as fine as the shall. Period.
Oh, I see why. Look at line 23, Deborah.
Mm-hmm.
There's the shall. Okay,
I thought I just said that though a second ago.
I
read it out loud.
yeah, it's hard because it shifts there, but I think the shall governs everything, and then, the may not, I think is.
Well,
just-
thank you, Senator Waters,
I
for,
think, But I
for
don't-
that
I
detailed
think
read.
we're
I
there,
appreciate
but
that.
I don't know. I think so.
Further discussion?
I think we're there.
Seeing none? All in favor of the amendment? It's aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Seeing none? Is there a motion? Passes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Consent?
Yeah, sure.
All right,
Second.
all right. Senator Bertzel, consent. Senator Waters, seconds. All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. And Senator Waters, would you like to take
No,
this
you're
out?
gonna take it out, it's your bill.
Well, you're on it too.
Yeah, but your bill.
All right.
You're Mr.
I'll take
Chairman.
it out.
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Just going to give you the honors, if that's okay. All right.
So on 227, you want me to move,
Re-refer.
re-refer?
I'll second.
Discussion? All in favor of re-refer? 227? Any opposed? Seeing none, and we'll put that on consent. Senator Pearl said so, and Senator Bertzel, what, seconded? All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye. Good. Perfect. And we'll use that.
Waters want to take that one?
Yes. All right.
Any others you want to do today?
My blood sugar is so low. I don't have,
I don't think any of the others we heard today we can do.
no.
That's stuff we have to work on.
I will, next week, we'll exec the rest, I guess.
Right.
So the week after that, then 2 weeks, give me time to digest a couple of things.
Okay.
And so we got a couple done, a couple important ones.
Motion to move out of exec?
Seconded by Senator Birdsall, all in favor, say aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? None. Now I gotta go to Maine.
Finance.
I know. No, I gotta go work.
Biddeford has some nice coffee shops.
I know, I'm gonna have to suck down a lot. So, thank you for your help.
Are you okay, Deborah? I think we're there. I know it's a little dicey there, but is it all?